afternoon. I will call to order this regularly scheduled meeting of the Community Development Committee for the Metropolitan Council. It's Monday, March 20th, 2023. Welcome, committee. This is our first meeting of our new term, and Councilmember Dolkar will not be joining us today. She had a conflict here, but I'm thrilled that we're joined by our another new committee member, Councilmember Tony Carter. Welcome. Yeah. It's good to have you here. We're starting out easy for you, Councilmember Carter, where yes, you're very welcome. It's just information items today, no business items, and so you'll get quite a bit of good background on the issues that are coming forward. This committee is a hardworking committee. We've been teeing up some good work to start with this term. One of the key things that we're going to be looking at is our Livable Communities Demonstration Account evaluation criteria. Direction came from this committee when we approved the 2023 criteria. And so my intent is that we'll do that in committee. We'll do this work. It'll be very workshop-y. So sometimes this committee works that way. Often we have a number of business items, but the three items today will give you, all of us, some great grounding and background into the work of this committee. So, without further, and also I'll point out, normally it's Director Barajas that's sitting here, but Ms. Smith, Terry Smith from our Metro HRA is filling in because Director Barajas is on vacation. Thank you. Well deserved, yeah. So committee members, we have an agenda in front of us. If there's no changes, recommended changes, we can just consider it approved by consensus. Looks like it's fine, thanks, we have an agenda. Next on the agenda is the approval of the March 6, 2023 Community Development Committee meetings. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, council members. Any discussion, additions, corrections, changes? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. No consent business items. No non-consent business items. So we'll move right into our information items. The first is the Housing Trust Fund Program. It's a program that's been up and on its feet for a couple of decades now, right? And so we'll be hearing an update and presentation from Stephanie Paulson. Stephanie, what is your title? If you could introduce yourself by title as well, please. Ms. Paulson, welcome.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Stephanie Paulson. I'm the Assistant Director for the Metropolitan Council Housing and Redevelopment Authority.
Perfect. Thank you.
And I'm here today to talk to you just to give you some updates on the Housing Trust Fund program. I'll walk you through kind of the history of the program, a timeline of events, and where we are projecting to go with this program as it's evolved with housing needs in the community. So this partnership, this Housing Trust Fund, it's a partnership with Anoka County. We do the rent calculations and housing quality standards inspections, and Anoka County is the grantee. They're our community partner. They operate the program referrals, housing stability, and intervention services. We established this partnership in 2002, and we apply for funding on the biennium through Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. This program was proposed as a self-sufficiency initiative for people enrolled in the Anoka County job training programs back in early 2000s. Since the partnership was established, the program design has been updated to accommodate community needs in just a changing economy. 2023 is a long time from 2002. So I'll walk you through. In 2002, the maximum subsidy that a rental assistance, back then it was called RAC, Rental Assistance for Anoka County, the maximum subsidy a household was eligible for was $350 per month, because again, it was seen as a self-sufficiency program. In 2007, the program was updated to a whopping $400 per month, and again, still seen as a self-sufficiency program. In 2020, we recognized that families were struggling with the shallow subsidy. And so we worked with Minnesota Housing Finance Agency to operate at a deeper subsidy calculation. So it modeled more similarly to the Housing Choice Voucher Program as opposed to just this cap subsidy. In practice, part of the reason that this happened is, let's say a family was receiving $400 in maximum subsidy. They called and said, I've had a change in income, my income has decreased. Our hands were tied, there was nothing we could do. They were already receiving the $400. It's it's terrible news to give a family. And so that's why we transitioned that program model in 2020 to provide that deeper subsidy calculation. So the program continued in 2021 to 2023, that biennium. We were awarded $609,000 with the goal of assisting 23 to 29 households. It really depended on average housing assistance payment. And with every offer and award through MHFA, the criteria and scoring criteria changes a bit. In this particular biennium, there's an increased emphasis on housing stability and intervention services that our grantee Anoka County would provide. This led to some really intentional conversations with Anoka County and what their capacity was to provide some of the housing stability and intervention services that we're continuing to kind of grow these service components in the program. So we started having conversations. What does the community need? What does Anoka County need? How can we best serve families? So at the same time that we were, operating our Anoka County Housing Trust Fund program, in 2019, they applied for a Homework Starts with Home planning grant. And this was for them to really explore the needs of their community. They really wanted to see if the programs and services that they were currently offered, how they needed to refine, where they needed to kind of start investing their time and their energy in. And in 2021, there was a findings report that outlined educational outcomes of youth and families experiencing homelessness in Anoka County. And like you can anticipate, all the negative impacts associated with those. So they started to explore more seriously a Homework Starts with Home grant based on the data that they received in this planning grant. So the planning grant is basically to start investigating a potential need for the program, and then if interested, then you actually applied for the program. Homework Starts with Home is, just as some background, it is a collaborative blend of funding, so you can use different sources for this Homework Starts with Home program, but it's really a collaborative effort between schools and housing organizations and the government. That's where we would come in with the housing subsidy support to identify, engage, and stabilize students and families experiencing homelessness. Like I said, using the information gathered from Anoka County's Homework Start with Home planning grant, and after a series of meetings with Anoka County, they decided they had interest in formally applying for the Homework Starts with Home program in 2023, seeing it to be a great benefit for children and youth experiencing homelessness in Anoka County. So this leads to the program design that they are interested in. What they are proposing and what we've talked about with them is that they would be the lead applicant on the Homework Starts with Home program. So where we fit into this equation is they would be using the Housing Trust Fund rental assistance to fund the subsidy in partnership with the Homework Starts with Home program. Similar to what we do now with our Homework Starts with Home program, we would do rent calculations, HQS inspections, and do all of the rental assist components. That's what we're good at, and that's what we can do. Some council members may recall previous conversations that we've in the HRA come to with the Homework Starts with Home program. As a reminder, in 2020, we started introducing this program to you in the way that we could think about place-based strategies. So in 2020, we adopted a waiting list preference for Homework Starts with Home program at Solid Ground in Ramsey County. And just to provide some background and a refresher for you all, this partnership was with Solid Ground with families in a variety of school districts in Mounds View, Oakdale, North St. Paul, Maplewood, Roseville, and White Bear Lake. And this program was designed to stabilize families in those districts. We are continuing conversations to expand these partnerships, obviously with Anoka County, with Hennepin County, and with Carver County, so every county in our jurisdiction. And that kind of concludes my presentation. I really wanted to just come to let you all know that this is something that's in the works. We don't intend to apply for Housing Trust Fund in its normal kind of historical capacity, just because Anoka County has identified a need in another way. We'll still operate a Housing Trust Fund program, assuming that they are funded when they submit their application. It's just going to be a slightly different way of doing it, and wanted to keep you all in the loop about what's happening in the HRA. So with that, I'll take any questions or comments.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Paulson, for the report and for your work on this. Committee members, questions on that report? Comments? Okay. It looks like you did a good job, Stephanie, introducing it, no questions, so. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Chambliss, then Councilmember Lindstrom. Councilmember Chambliss.
Yes. I just wanted to say that I really am glad that we helped to kick this program off and that we're looking to expand it. No one knows what it's like to experience the need that these families have unless they've been involved or have friends or family members involved. Being a leader in this initiative feels really good on behalf of the community.
Cool. Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Lindstrom.
And there's no question about that. I'm curious about the timing for rolling this out in Anoka County in particular.
Sure. The Homework Starts with Home application is currently open, and so Anoka County is working to kind of finalize partners because, like I said, it's a collaborative initiative, and so Anoka County is working with other nonprofits because there's a youth component and then a children component. So youth experiencing homelessness and then children in schools. And sometimes there's overlap and sometimes that's separate. The Housing Trust Fund application has not opened yet and not dropped through MHFA yet. Normally, I probably in the next 4 to 6 weeks, I would anticipate that coming out, and then we'll submit that application. They'll be the lead, but we've had conversations about how I can support that since this is their first time doing the Housing Trust Fund application. So I'll help them submit that application as a part of their greater application for Homework Starts with Home.
Well, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Just a real basic question. They're in favor of these changes. You've been working hand in hand regularly, and we're moving forward on this together.
Absolutely. We had, I want to say we've probably been talking with them for 12 to 18 months in ways that they didn't want to lose any type of rental assistance program. We've had this partnership since 2002, but they were recognizing that the way that the program was evolving wasn't meeting the need that they were identifying, which was keeping families, and especially children, stabilized in schools and kind of this missing component. And it's kind of a really awesome opportunity for us to expand what we've already started in 2020, and so we're really excited about it and continue to have conversations with Hennepin and Carver too about ways that we can, if not this exact model, something like it to expand our place-based strategies.
Well, thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Stephanie, I know that under the program, when it was awarded, I believe in 2021 to 2023, in that biennium, it said 23 to 29 households, and that was under the trust fund program only.
Yep.
And then how many, just curious, like for Ramsey County or maybe Anoka County now, or how many families are we trying to serve, based on the amount of money that we get? And how does that compare with the need? I think I probably know the answer, but what kind of a bite are we taking out of the problem and turning it into a solution?
Sure, that's a great question, council members. So if thinking about Anoka County only, the $609,000, the 23 to 29 is using the $609,000. Solid Ground, we can serve up to 20 families, and that's our role in the Solid Ground partnership. Like you might recall, is us saying we can serve 20 people who are transitioning off of that program into a permanent subsidy through the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And we've been doing that. We're almost at full capacity. It really depends on when they transition off of that 18-month program with Solid Ground, but we get referrals, and it's a fantastic partnership, and it's working wonderfully. For the purposes of Anoka County, we are thinking about the ways that we could even model what we did with Ramsey County with Anoka County is we don't need to just stop at Housing Trust Fund. We can do a version of this. Their program, they anticipate their program, their Homework Starts with Home program to be smaller, but we can think about another model like this of do we want to, and of course we'll come back to you all to have further conversation because that would really be a business item, but do we want to think about this preference in a more expansive way and say, maybe we want to increase that number of vouchers that we want to devote to our Homework Starts with Home strategy and say, go from 20 to maybe 30 or 40, or I don't really know. We haven't really, it's not a fully baked idea, but if a family is stable and a family likes the community that they're in and they're connected with whatever supports or schools or that they have, we should do what we can to keep them there. And so that's kind of the logic and thought process.
And so, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, please,
Thank you,
Councilmember.
because that really helped me more fully understand. So are we talking about hundreds of families, dozens of families, tens of families?
The Homework Starts with Home program that they're trying to develop right now, there's two components, and I'm not the greatest expert in the part that we're not involved with. So there's a rapid rehousing side, and that's with youth and kind of meeting more immediate needs, and then the Housing Trust Fund side on our side. And the way they have it designed is like somewhere between 10 and 20 to start, because they really want to make sure that they have enough services to provide the 10 to 20 families, and then kind of seeing it as a way to learn and not bite off more than they can chew, and then grow it from there, assuming that the fact that we're having ongoing conversations about the way we can support permanent subsidy, the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and expanding this waitlist preference is really desirable to them too, and a great way to offer this comprehensive service to go from stable school setting to a temporary housing assistance program, the Housing Trust Fund that we would operate with this model. And then you're stable and completed that program, and now you move to the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And it kind of makes sure that we're meeting every kind of marker along the way.
Great, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
further
Councilmember.
discussion? Councilmember Bento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is Solid Ground, would it ever be appropriate to visit Solid Ground and do like a tour or
I
kind of just see firsthand?
am absolutely, would be happy to ask and find out.
Yeah, and I don't want to make it uncomfortable or inappropriate. I think it's in my district. Yeah, it's in White Bear, right?
Yes. So that's
Well,
kind of,
the one that serves the Northeast Metro.
yes, White Bear Lake, yes.
Yeah. So if it would be appropriate, I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable or mean extra work, and I don't want anybody to fuss about it, but it would be just with, once a teacher, always a teacher, even though I'm an old teacher now, but I would really just love to just see what they're doing.
The other thing that, and would offer up is maybe the opportunity to have, if I come back and if this is of interest to you, council members, to do kind of a program update with partners that are more on the ground as opposed to just me providing updates.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to dig into that and bring some more people up here just so you can see the decisions that you're making and the policy guidance that you're giving to us, how it kind of comes to fruition in our community.
Thanks. Yeah, Ms. Paulson, it looks like the committee would like that. And I know Ms. Smith wants to comment as well. So Councilmember Bento, were you still in this line or?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, Councilmember Bento, and then we'll go to Ms. Smith and then Councilmember Carter.
Okay, so I'm looking at this, and how many locations do they have?
The scattered sites, so when in the solid ground program right now, they're able to lease in place if they want, if they're already established in a community.
Got it.
So it doesn't necessarily need to be, so if there's a site that you'd want to tour and we can have further conversation about this, we can absolutely do that, but there are scattered throughout the community as a part of this
Sorry
program.
for being so spacey.
No,
I should
gosh.
have looked this up earlier,
No,
but
gosh,
thank
no.
you.
Ask away.
Thanks. Comment from Ms. Smith and then,
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and Councilmember Vento, just a point of clarification. So Solid Ground is a development that contains, I think it's 34 units, and their project-based vouchers are attached to that project.
Right.
For the Homework Starts with Home program, the families don't live at that project. They're living, as Stephanie said, in scattered sites. So
Right.
a tour of Solid Ground would be, is a great idea, but you'd be touring project-based voucher. It wouldn't be anything to do with the Homework Starts with Home program.
Got
So
it.
just wanted to make that
Got
clarification.
it.
thank you, Ms. Smith. Ms. Carter, goodbye. Great.
If I could, I just,
Councilmember Vento.
and I think this has been said by many people more than once, but at the heart of the federal homeless legislation was and is this concept of, homework starts at home. And I know that back in the 80s when they were working on it, there was at least one teacher involved in the development of the legislation who had seen firsthand in Minneapolis what it was like for kids to be homeless and to be moving around from shelter to shelter, which resulted in moving around from school to school and the impact that that had on the child and the family. So I can't say enough good things about the Solid Ground, and and homework begins at home. I really appreciate this update. This is great.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Kudos to Anoka County.
Any further discussion on this report? Seeing none, thanks, Ms. Paulson, for the report and for answering our questions. And we'll move on the agenda to our next item, which is a minor update to the Metropolitan Urban Service Area Implementation Guidelines, or MUSA. And Ms. Torres is here, Angela Torres. Welcome, Ms. Torres.
Thank you, Chair. Committee, it's good to see you again. For our newest member, I'll reintroduce myself. I'm Angela Torres. I'm the Manager of Local Planning Assistance in the Community Development Division. Local Planning Assistance is a work unit that provides both technical assistance to local governments and works on policy development as well as part of the 2050 Regional Guide. So with that, I'll start on MUSA implementation guidelines. We're proposing a minor update. I'll just talk briefly. It's a good opportunity to kind of reground ourselves in what MUSA is and how it's used at the council. We'll talk a little bit about the current guidelines, the proposed minor change, and then what's next to come. So I wanted to make sure that none of my photos in the presentation were from like Minneapolis, because that is not where MUSA is. MUSA is along the developing edge.
No disrespect to me.
So I wanted to make sure we hit a cornfield or two, although we do love our ag areas in the region. So what is MUSA? Metropolitan Urban Service Area. It's defined in the most current adopted Regional Development Guide for right now. That's Thrive MSP 2040. It includes those areas that are already served or planned for regional wastewater services. So we've got existing development with wastewater services and planned development. And the slide says through 2040, but that's because of the duration of Thrive MSP 2040. The planning horizon is until 2040. That would obviously extend every decade as the regional plans and policies are updated. That's MUSA. It's been ambiguous and rigid and flexible, kind of all things at all times over the years. It's had a long history at the council. So it includes not only the developed areas, but additional area in which the council will ensure that regional services are provided in the next round of comp plans, as I mentioned. It relates to the provision of urban services, but those urban services do not include water supply or things that are outside of so we call them urban services, and that is obviously more than wastewater service, but from the council's point of view, that's the system that we operate. So it's not talking about some of those other components. The current service area was adopted as part of Thrive in 2014. You heard for the first time or for the millionth time in Wendy's case, or Councilmember Wolf's case, about community designations. So the urban service area includes urban center, urban, suburban edge, and emerging suburban edge communities. And the rural service area includes everything else. I won't go into all of those. In Thrive, the approach within the urban service area was what was much more defined than the previous regional development guides. As I said, you might remember Raya's presentation at the Committee of the Whole last week, where she shared the Thrive designations were based on 5 different variables, 5 different factors, one of which is the MUSA. The other, another is the long-term service area. So the Metropolitan Urban Service Area is not the same thing as the long-term service area. The long-term service area actually reflects the ultimate capacity of our wastewater treatment plants. And what is planned as part of the MUSA is what is expected to develop until the end of our planning horizon. That's the area that the council commits to providing services to or making improvements in order to provide services. The other factors that are part of the community designations in Thrive, just as a quick reminder, is percentage of developable land committed to urban areas or urban uses, and the age of the housing stock, proxy for age of infrastructure and general development patterns, and intersection density, which indicates connectivity, urban form, and accessibility. Minimum density expectations are used to implement the MUSA by ensuring that local governments that are served by the regional wastewater system are planning for forecasted growth with certain intensity of development that makes the provision of those services cost-effective and efficient. You'll see the table outlines the expected density for each of the urban service areas as well as the rural centers, rural service areas, so that as new areas of the developing edge are brought into the MUSA and greenfield development, redevelopment, those new developments have to average out to a minimum of 3 units per acre across the community. We do that using new and redevelopment as part of our evaluation. Existing development is not part of the minimum at this time. This accommodates housing choices and flexibility. Areas like downtowns can have much higher densities and other areas can have single-family or townhome development, so it provides a variety of choice. You'll see that minimums in the more developed areas of the region are higher. That's because the analysis during the development of Thrive MSP 2030's designations showed that they are already developing at those densities and wouldn't be able to accommodate forecasted growth at lower densities. So land supply also plays a role in that as well. Local comprehensive plans for communities with regional wastewater service must identify the timing and staging of lands available for urban development through the planning horizon in 10-year stages. The map here shows how the city of Shakopee plans to implement their MUSA line locally in its 2040 comprehensive plan. So while the council's MUSA boundary may show that the entire city of Shakopee or a large portion of it would be planned for capacity out to 2040. The city may have a more constrained approach depending on when they think that development will happen and where they think the infrastructure is most necessary. So they can have a smaller area than the council's ultimate MUSA boundary. So we do review plans and plan amendments to ensure that the timing aligns with our regional plans, our CIPs. In other words, we'll either have or will have capacity available for the planned development shown in the plan, in addition to ensuring that sufficient land is made available to support forecasted growth. If the community's plan reflects 2040 development to occur outside of the regional 2040 service area, the staging plan identifying the timing of the local system expansion is required. The council reviews and evaluates its ability to provide service consistent with the new staging plan. So as I'll mention in the next slide, we do see amendments to MUSA quite often. And when can that happen? So how and why MUSA can change. There's a couple of specific examples. Development around the 2050 Regional Development Guide will evaluate the existing MUSA growth forecast and the existing system to see if there are any regional changes to the MUSA needed. Usually this is done at the request of local governments. For example, when the city of Rogers asked the Metropolitan Council to take over their wastewater treatment facility, of which took decades to actually plan for those kinds of changes, and it's now up and running, and the council has taken that facility and run. Other changes can happen during the comp plan process with communities helping to refine the MUSA within their own jurisdiction. Communities can also request smaller changes as new developments are proposed in areas that aren't currently in their comp plan. And as new and redevelopments happen in the city that might not have been planned for perhaps earlier than expected, the city can request service earlier than previously expected. As we'll be kind of talking about today, communities that identify failing septic systems can also request to make connections to the regional system. So broad big picture, that's MUSA. Maybe I should pause and see if there are any questions.
Thanks, Ms. Torres. Questions on this part of the report? Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Chair Angela. I'm just wondering if we, as we identify trends, we don't necessarily reach out to the municipalities to suggest changes, but we prepare for the future based on those trends. Can you speak to how that works in terms of what we might see? And do we ever communicate with cities or, intervene or suggest that updates be made sooner than later?
Ms. Torres?
Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, actually, we do talk with cities before any changes are made. So even as we're looking at the ultimate MUSA boundary for the 2050 Regional Development Plan, a lot of that and any changes that would happen is done in concert with cities. Long-term planning for the wastewater treatment system is an in-depth and it is a slow process. So anytime that the council is taking on any additional MUSA areas, growing the system outside of the current boundaries is actually done in really close collaboration with local governments.
Thank you. Further questions, Councilmember Johnson?
That's a great question, and having lived through it for many, many years, Plymouth was, I think, 50,000 at the time I was first elected, maybe just under, and I think it topped 80 when I left. So a big part of Plymouth was then working on being incorporated into an extended MUSA line. And I will tell you, the locals are very engaged, and you have farmers and people out on property that don't want development at all, and then you have developers and people that want to continue to develop for those trends that you were talking about in different housing styles that were coming in. And I was really proud about how our community did it, and I'm sure every other community is working on this because it's really trying to balance. So we made it so that people wouldn't be taxed off of their land. Then we worked inside to stage the development as it came, as MUSA, as the sewer lines were brought in. And then everybody had that longer view plan. The interesting thing was, the economy changes, 2008 changed. There was some development where we had to put a moratorium on because we were getting so much high density so fast that was a thing. And then all of a sudden the land is worth a lot, and those people that never were going to leave their land want to now leave their land, and they're not in the stage that they wished they were. I will just say this, I think cities are on the front edge of trends because the developers are showing up when trends are emerging. So you see real quick what types of housing styles are coming in, what age they might be targeting, things like that. And I will just say that, the Met Council was a great source of help for us, and I was eventually representing this part of Plymouth. So the staff people really, I think it's a very wonderful relationship with community development and everybody here at Met Council and ES. So just that's my experience on it. So on the front end, when you are in the council meetings with all the public hearings, you are hearing everything about what they want and don't want. But at the end of the day, I believe communities develop very well. I was going to say comprehensively, but that just seems to be redundant. Because everybody shows up when you've got that big of stuff showing up, So it was a good process for me to go through, never imagining I'd actually end up being at the Met Council. So appreciate all the work that you guys do to work very seamlessly with cities and provide the support they need along the way.
Great, thanks. Further discussion, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to just pile on to Councilmember Johnson's comments. So I was Planning Commission in Lakeville, and then Lakeville City Council, and then came here. And when we figure out our wastewater system, we try as much as possible to use gravity because gravity's free. And pumping things uphill costs a lot of money and requires a lot more maintenance. Cities have to do the same thing because their little pipes need gravity too. And when I started on the Planning Commission, you had to send in every single plat to be added into the MUSA. Lakeville was growing very rapidly at that point and said, you know what, this is ridiculous. We can't do this. Let's put this into stages. And they actually went beyond the tenure and had sub-stages in there to let the landowners and the developers who wanted to put options on land know what order gravity was going to make the development have to go. And as you said about understanding trends, we put the detached townhomes into a zoning for that back then, right before 2000, because we saw that that was getting to be a thing that was really popular with seniors who wanted to have, they didn't want to share a wall with anybody, but they didn't want maintenance either. And there's also some things that you try that don't work as well. But the cities, especially the ones that are growing rapidly, have to be on top of this, because when you got developers coming at you at that pace, if you don't have good plans in place, they will run right over you and you'll have a mess. But if you have good plans in place, then you can work with it. Our wastewater system plans out 70 years or so for the pipes, because it's a lot cheaper to put in a big pipe and fill it up later than go back and dig it up to put in a bigger pipe. But like you said, we're only allowed to officially plan out 20 years, and then we give them an idea of where it could be in the longer term, so that we keep things from developing into 2.5-acre lots with McMansions on them that can't be redeveloped for future urban development. So it's complicated, but it all works together.
Cool. Thank you for
Chair,
sharing
could I
the
just
experience.
add
Yeah,
one more
Councilmember
fun
Johnson.
thing? So isn't this great? I mean, so, and then I would say once Plymouth Pipes came in and we had that extra capacity, we were able to lend our capacity to Medina. And so, you can still help those emerging edge communities is starting to see development, but they haven't gotten where they need to be. And then there finally comes a day where, I'm sorry, we need our capacity back, but they've planned for it. So those things really help those communities around us. And of course, whenever you do all of this, you're sharing all your plans with your neighboring communities too, so that you can always work on that shared service that you need. So can you tell we love local government?
Love the MUSA.
So,
You thought it was going to be a
Councilmember
short
Carter.
meeting, sorry.
so coming from Ramsey County, this is my first time discussing the wastewater treatment beyond those boundaries, and I'm happy to learn about MUSA, and I thought it was something else. So I'm glad to be here at the meeting today. I wanted to ask, you talked about, the fact that the capacity in the MUSA is planned for the current planning period, but then there is also the other thing, and I'm going to have to ask you what that was, that thinks about the total capacity of the Metropolitan Council, or give me that again, because I want to know.
Torres.
Chair and committee members, I think you're referring to what I mentioned about the long-term service
Thank you.
area. Yep. And that is the Metropolitan Council's kind of build-out plan. As it stands, it can always change. We update our plans every 10 years as well, and, there's always the kind of argument, do you maintain, do you continue to grow, maybe you centralize, maybe you decentralize, so there's a lot of different things. Every one of the rural centers that you can see on community designations map, let me just maybe go back to that real quick.
Thank you.
There are tiny little yellow, orangish communities out in Scott and Carver, Dakota County, for example. There's others as well. They tend to have their own wastewater treatment plant. And so while they're not part of the regional system, eventually they may be. And so perhaps some of the area that we're not currently serving
Now I
would actually
understand.
be encompassed in the long run. That's not necessarily just tied to rural centers and their wastewater treatment plants. However, it could be some of the land area between one wastewater treatment plant and another. And so ultimately, that build-out capacity is something that we look at every 10 years as well, and define what the long-term service area is. But what we use on a day-to-day basis to implement the current plan is the MUSA. And so the MUSA is actually in 10-year increments. So we have a 2040 MUSA. We also have a 2030 MUSA, because we do ask local governments. I'll show you the Shakopee map once again. You can see that the Shakopee map staged their growth in 10-year increments as to when the local MUSA would be expanding. And so the council does that as well, so that we understand what's expected capacity by 2040, but we also know what the 2030 and what was the 2020 MUSA was as well. So we do our planning in those big chunks of time as well.
Thank you very much for breaking that down a little bit slower. It helped. It really helped. And the understanding that I have is that the long-range plan also, as it exists today, is not necessarily limited forever, that may change as well. Thank you.
Mr.
Good
Chair,
questions.
if
Yeah,
I may, just
Councilmember
one.
Johnson.
And also then redevelopment happens. So you have to look at what past land uses were dictating for wastewater or whatever you're measuring, traffic, what have you. And you've got to see how that impacts too. Not so much, but it's something in redeveloping that you've got to pay attention to as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you. Could you go back to the Shakopee map for a second? And for Councilmember Carter, the pink land on there is owned by the Shakopee Midwacaton Sioux community. And because that is tribal land, they plan for it. And probably 10 years ago, we made an agreement. They used to make the cities plan for stuff that was never going to happen because it's owned by the tribe and the tribe can do what they want. We actually started working together. Imagine that. And so that land is no longer planned by the city. That is planned by the tribe. So they decide what happens. They have their own wastewater treatment plant, which is really nice, and they love to show it off if you guys ever want tours. But so all of that pink land is tribal land and not planned for by us because the tribe has jurisdiction over that.
Okay.
Thank you. Any further discussion at this point? Otherwise, Ms. Torres, please continue.
Let's dig into the MUSA implementation guidelines. So just to give some history of the guidelines, in 2004, before the 2030 local comprehensive plans were under development, so the plans that were due in 2008, so this is a while ago, the first MUSA implementation guidelines were adopted as part of a collaborative effort with metro cities to address questions about density calculations and comprehensive plan reviews. The guidelines have evolved over time. Most recently, in 2017, the guidelines were updated to reflect Thrive MSP 2040 policy. This maintained the flexibility of the local MUSA to be more responsive to market demands, yet pivoted from expansion to maintenance of the regional wastewater infrastructure. For communities that are developing at higher densities than the minimum planned in sewered areas, the MUSA implementation guidelines give credit through a program called the Plat Monitoring Program, which you'll hear about in the next couple of months because we do annual reporting on that. And the Plat Monitoring Program provides additional flexibility to respond to the local market demand. Guidelines aren't applied frequently, so we're talking about something that happens on occasion. They're only applied to existing developments proposed to be added to the regional wastewater system, and then when trying to determine if development counts towards the density calculations. So it's kind of a very narrow path of which you have to travel down in order for the implementation guidelines to actually apply. So the requirements of the MUSA implementation guidelines are that the city's overall residential density for development must be a minimum of 3 units per developable acre. Determination of density will be based upon constructed residential units, approved final plats, and the minimum density of the proposed land use category. So the minimum, every land use category has a range generally, whether that's from 3 to 5. And when we're thinking about density calculations, we always look at the minimum so that we're sure that the system would have capacity to provide service. Excuse me. There are some areas that are allowed to be excluded from the net density calculation, including areas, with failing septic systems, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Okay, for consideration, today we're proposing just a consideration of a minor update to clarify guidelines for failing communal systems, along with just a few housekeeping edits. There are 2 types of on-site subsurface septic systems for residential uses. because we're only talking about residential uses when we're talking about density calculations. There's communal systems which provide a subdivision with sewer service, and there's individual septic systems which could be on a single lot. If you have a 2.5 acre lot, for example, you'll often have an individual subsurface septic system. So we ran into a very unique circumstance later last year, because it is already 2023. I'll talk a little bit about Lake Elmo and the Tapestry development. So you might, for the rest of the council members, you may remember from a few months ago, the Lake Elmo Tapestry development came forward with an amendment. It involved 65 single-family homes on large rural lots, and the communal subsurface sewage treatment system was failing. The city of Lake Elmo is divided by 2 Thrive community designations, emerging suburban edge and rural residential, one of which allows for regional wastewater service, and one which doesn't. Rural residential community designations, the policy doesn't provide for regional wastewater services. That being said, the location of this amendment had a designation of rural residential, so it wasn't within the MUSA because it wasn't being planned for regional sewer system services. However, with the failing system, oftentimes we have to move and adapt, and the city requested an amendment to expand the MUSA, change the community designation, and allow connection to the regional system. The rural residential area, like I mentioned, is usually like a 2.5 acre lot development pattern. That's why you have maybe an on-site septic system, or in this case, the subdivision had a communal system. So in this case, the city asked for the acres, which is I think 156-ish acres. The city, okay, sorry, I lost my place. Cities can plan for and serve lower density development like in the Tapestry development, but this acreage is included in its overall planned density. Usually when you're adding large lots to your local MUSA, the impact to your density calculation is I guess the perception is that it is negative because it takes you from what you may be planning for a 4 units per acre. It drops you down the more acres that you have with fewer housing units on it. So in this case, the planned density started at 3.8 for the community. With the addition of these 65 units and the 155-ish acres, that dropped the city down to 3.2 units per acre. The very minimum across the region for any connections to regional wastewater system services is 3 units per acre. So you won't ever see like a council requirement of anything less than 3 units per acre because that's what it takes for the regional system to operate effectively. So when you're dropping things down, sometimes it may go down below below that 3 units per acre, and that's where conversations with the city and negotiations and whatnot happen. So in this case, it did count on their density calculations. The MUSA implementation guidelines were not explicit about communal systems. It said subsurface sewage treatment plant or sewage treatment systems, but it didn't refer to the communal system. So we're proposing just a minor change to be clear about that. The implementation guidelines were never intended to include communal systems. And so we did apply the guidelines correctly as they were intended to be, but we do want to be very transparent and clear in our guidelines when we're talking with local governments. And so we're proposing just a minor change to add that level of clarity.
Mr. Question from Councilmember Bento.
And I apologize for asking this question, but I get hung up on words sometimes. What does the word failing mean? Why is it failing? And
So that sounds like a wastewater question. I'm a land use planner. However, what I can say.
Wendy, do you know?
Is that
happen in our
I think you can effectively imagine what it means. It means that the system is no longer functioning and there is sewage that,
They have standards for how effectively the system needs to treat your sewage.
Okay.
And if it stops meeting those standards, then you need to either fix or replace your system. And I just, Mr. Chair,
Yeah,
if I
please,
could comment
Councilmember.
for a minute. So these kinds of developments happened a lot in the 90s, early 2000s, when places like Lake Elmo or Credit River decided they wanted to do suburbs without sewer, basically. So some of these lots can be as small as a half an acre, but served by a septic system. And Credit River is in my district, so I've talked with some of their people. When I was on the city council, I actually tried to get them to stop because I could see what was going to happen. But they're very difficult systems to maintain because if you have your own septic system, you know, be really careful what you flush down the toilet.
You know your
because you're
limits.
gonna wreck your system.
Right.
When you have 68 houses on a septic system and somebody flushes the wrong thing, good luck proving who messed up the septic system. So they end up being a big headache. And when they go bad for a whole bunch of people at one time. It's actually easier to connect to them because you connect to wherever their old tank was. But when you're connecting other failed septic systems, the people usually have an opportunity to subdivide their lot into more lots once they hook up to sewer to pay for the connection. When you have something like this, there is no opportunity to subdivide your lots into smaller lots. So
The assessments are high.
it costs a lot, and we should be discouraging this because it's not sustainable.
Well, and I did a little snooping around, and some of these homes have 3, 4, and 5 bathrooms, so you wouldn't even know which bathroom was causing the problem.
Just because you have lots of bathrooms doesn't mean you flush more. You may have bathrooms that are sitting idle, but still, it's
Yeah.
the number of people
Yeah.
that are on the system.
That's right.
It's a huge number of people on one system that's fragile.
Thank you.
Thanks, I had to ask that question because it was, what about it was failing, so thank you. I figured it had something to do with that.
Since we passed further discussion, Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand what the mitigation is going to be or the solution for the failing communal system. So we're going from the communal septic system to a regional septic system?
No,
No?
a pipe that connects to our system.
Okay, isn't our system regional?
Yeah, but it's not a septic system. They're just hooking in and they'll be flushing
treatment.
into our treatment plants just like
Okay,
everybody else.
okay.
That's the difference.
I was
Did you
saying
have
it
something to add, Ms. Torres, to that? It seemed like,
I think that Councilmember Wolf
Okay, yeah.
adequately responded, but I just wanted to make sure that I was.
and then as, if I'm understanding, then as Ms. Torres has explained to us, the previous policy did not allow for did not accommodate the communal septic system specifically. We could apply the policy, but we're refining that now so it's clear. That's the big change. Further conversation, or the minor change, I shouldn't have said big change, that's the minor change. Further discussion, Councilmember Carter.
I think you just answered my question because I was lost with what the change was, but that is simply it. It is just to add that communal systems can also be taken in over time with this kind of density. And so, yeah, what's the language that we'll hear?
Well, let's look at that.
Yep.
Okay.
Next slide.
Councilmember Wolf was requesting the floor, but are you prepared to move
going-
on? Thanks, okay.
Yeah,
I was
just
Torres.
I was just going to say,
Gotcha.
you know, communal systems, the regional system was never really, built with the intention of connecting regional communal systems. However, when you have a failing system, whether that's one site or a communal site, those systems have to be decommissioned. There are environmental impacts. There's a process for that, and then connected to the regional system. And we do, even though it was a development pattern that was discouraged by the council at the time, that doesn't mean that we forego our responsibilities to provide services when environmental impacts are apparent. And so what we would do with this proposed change is be explicit that as part of the density calculations, when we're reviewing comprehensive plan amendments and applying the MUSA guidelines, that that area does have to be included in your density calculations, which has what's perceived as a negative impact, because inevitably large areas with few lots will decrease your overall community density. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it helps a lot.
And so the proposed edits I'm showing here is that last sentence is really the change that we're proposing. The full MUSA implementation guidelines are in the memo that was attached to this business item, but this is the only changes that we're proposing. We did want to clarify, average net residential density for new development and redevelopment. And it's not preliminary plats, it is final plats, so we'll just say plats, and if needed, should be added as well. So like I said, it's just a refinement in that first sentence, and then in the last, first paragraph, and then in the last sentence, that addition. We consider that a minor update for your consideration. I'll pause.
Can I, lots of council members requesting the floor now, but just to clarify, on the last thing you said, and I was checking with Ms. Smith as well, and this is an administrative change, right? We won't be voting on it, and is that because we're calling it minor? Is that, or if it were a major change, would we be voting on it?
Actually, Chair, I'll move on to the next one.
Perfect. Well, and then I did have three council members requesting.
And I'll move back. In order to answer your question, I do want to let you know, this will have to be a business item in a future meeting. When we are proposing changes to how the council applies any adopted guidelines, and the MUSA guidelines are an adopted guideline by the council, those are not things that can be made at the staff level. So we're here today as an information item to kind of field all the questions and hear from other experiences, but then we will, in a future meeting, I'll take your feedback and then come back before you. But
Sure.
I'll
Thank
pause
you.
now.
Thanks for that response. And then hands went up so quickly, I'm not sure I got them in the right orders, but I have
Everybody, just go down the
requested, council members Chambliss, then Johnson, then Wolf. Councilmember Chambliss.
Okay, I think as I'm reading this, as I'm reading the proposed update guidelines, I think I'm understanding that I'm having a hard time with that last sentence in red and connecting that to the first, the heading of number 2, what will not be counted in the city's density calculation. But then we're saying areas with communal systems will be included in density calculations. So does that heading need to be clearer, or is it just me trying to figure this out?
Ms. Torres.
Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, it's complicated, so I understand the confusion. So in the last update to the guidelines, there was a provision added where on-site septic systems were allowed to be connected, and that area would not be added to their density calculation. And what the last sentence is saying is that doesn't apply to communal systems. Communal systems will apply to their density calculations. Is that helpful?
Yeah, so I would maybe, I still think number 2 needs to be revised so that it's clear that there's an exception for the communal systems. So if it's if it's a regional treatment, if it's part of the regional transit, I'm sorry, the regional wastewater, thank you, treatment system, then we count the density calculations currently.
Chair.
But with the communal, currently, we're not including the density calculations, but we're going to change them now to include, or am I just, do I need to study some more?
Ms. Torres.
Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, I might ask you to restate your question because I got a little lost.
Okay,
with
well,
that.
that's
So
what
I
I'm
just-
saying. I think I just need to study some more because I'm getting a little lost, and I think I'm getting stuck on the heading. Not being specific about what's included and what's excluded in the heading.
Okay.
And I think, Councilmember Chambers, I think also one of the things that contributes to confusion here are, we're talking about multiple types of systems, right? So there's the subsurface sewage treatment system, the SST, whatever, S. And that won't be counted within the density, and that's how the practice has been. Now we're clarifying that failing communal systems are not in that heading, right? And they will be counted with the density calculations. Am I restating that correctly?
You
Ms.
paraphrased that perfectly.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
So,
And
Chair,
then,
I
Councilmember
think
Chambers.
it might be helpful to kind of break it out into two different paragraphs so that it's more clear.
I can do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
sense.
Because it has quite an impact, I assume, Ms. Torres, when you start including those in the density calculations. And, well, you showed us the example. Okay, two more council members requested are Councilmember Johnson, then
Yeah,
Councilmember
thank you,
Wolf.
Mr. Chair. And again, just looking at the first section, I think removing preliminary is really good, because things can change. And we don't have to put final plat, but sometimes final plats aren't even implemented, but I get ya. And then what is the if needed? So just, that seems wiggly to me.
Ms.
And
Torres.
the only reason I ask is cities look at every word, and is it shall
This is
or
all about being
must,
more
and
transparent with our
if or
communities,
when,
right?
you know, so.
Ms.
Chair
Torres.
and Councilmember Johnson, we only say if needed because some communities are planning for well above 3 units per acre. And so that kind of line where you might dip down below the minimum requirement doesn't apply. So they have plenty of flexibility, lots of room to wiggle in their planning process, but every community is different. So the large majority, like I said, the MUSA implementation guidelines aren't often implemented, aren't used except in very kind of narrow circumstances. And so we have never had, since the implementation guidelines were adopted back in 2004 or whatever, any kind of issues with wanting a connection to a communal system. And so it just never occurred to the authors back then that they may want to clarify that. Now we've had an example. We want to make sure that we are applying guidelines and the requirements of the Metropolitan Council evenly and equitably, and I think clarifying that for future use is important.
Thanks, and to Councilmember Wolf's point as well, that the communal systems have aging infrastructure, and so we're being proactive and more transparent with our communities by calling them, by identifying them within this policy. So I'm guessing we'll see more of that. Councilmember Wolf, then Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I think this is a good way to go, especially because of what I said before. When people have just their own septic system and it's failing, and maybe there's a subdivision across the street, so they hook into that subdivision across the street, eventually that lot is probably going to be chopped into smaller lots. So counting it in their density equation doesn't make any sense. But when you connect up a whole neighborhood that's established and not going to change, it does need to be counted in the density calculations because that's the permanent neighborhood. So that's the difference between a single septic hooking up and a neighborhood septic hooking up, if that makes sense.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, thank you.
Great. Further discussion, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks. Just going back to the example that you gave with Lake Elmo. If this change were in place a year ago, that tapestry development could still move forward with what the city wanted to do, connecting to the regional system. It just would have been more clear, right?
Ms. Torres?
Chair and committee members, actually, it's always able to go forward because when it's a failing system, the council, I think through either statute or maybe MPCA guidelines, is required to provide assistance and allow connection to the regional system. In addition to that, just one other clarification, this is how we applied it for Lake Elmo. So we did make them add that into their density calculations, and so we just wanted to kind of memorialize that in the actual guidelines. So there wouldn't be any difference between what was done with the Lake Elmo example and going forward. This is how we applied it.
And it just clarifies how it should be applied in the future.
Correct.
More transparency. Councilmember Carter?
Thank you, had the density fallen below 3, once again, how would we have responded?
Chair and committee members,
Or how would we in the future?
yeah, I think in a lot of ways it would depend on the situation and the local kind of community development pattern, et cetera. However, how do I?
With the failing,
They are
system.
failing systems, and so we have to provide that connection. It's just a matter of whether or not it's communal or an individual system in this case.
there are a lot of what-ifs, and so I won't go
Yeah.
through all of those different scenarios, but thanks for giving us this to think about. And it appears as though by making certain that we are including the communals in the density calculations with future development planning, we're hoping to make certain we don't run into that as much in the future.
Chair and committee members, we're trying to discourage this development pattern from happening. And so when we do run across these situations, if a community were to drop below 3 units per acre, inevitably what we would encourage is for the community to guide higher density elsewhere to offset the lower density that's being added to the system. So they're able to do all of those things. That's why we kind of have some flexibility throughout all of the various guidelines built into how we operate, how we apply these things. But there's, again, a close working relationship between the local governments and my team and the team in ES that works in this area to kind of help local governments navigate some of that. And while communities may at times dip below 3 units per acre, ultimately the consistency with policy requires that then they would, in future amendments or as other developments come forward, guide land so that it's at a higher density so that the community across the community has planned for at a minimum 3 units per acre.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Johnson?
And that's all I was gonna say too, is that it's ongoing. So a community sees that their density is dropping, but they've got other ways with redevelopment or future development to adjust for that. And sometimes it can, get them out of compliance with Livable Communities Act programming. And you'll see these come through and you'll go, oh my gosh, they're not at the density they need to be. Well, you have to remember, it's a big plan and they know that, and they'll probably speak to that somewhere in there. And sometimes they don't care if they're part of livable communities or not, but, and that's okay, they get those choices too. But it's kind of a bit of art and science, I would say, but it's very specific, because our team is always looking at those big systems and making sure that they're complying.
And we'll see these, Councilmember Carter, from time to time as we approve comprehensive plans from the local communities. It will say this plan is not in compliance. We still amend it into the regional comprehensive plan. And we're entering on the 2050 planning era now, but we saved a few of these 2040 comprehensive plans
I've got
for
one
you
coming.
to approve. Yeah, you're very welcome. I think we're down in the single digits if I'm.
I have one in my community.
Well,
I'm
very
excited to
good,
get it
very
through
good.
finally.
Cool. And then Councilmember Johnson, did you want to add, or Councilmember
thank you.
Wolf?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And sometimes even when communities have everything planned according to the rules, they can drop below on their actual development. Because in a lot of the smaller cities on the edge, single family comes first. And there isn't anybody that wants to build an apartment building, even if there's land that's zoned for that. And then when the apartment building does come in, it's such a big boost in density that it pops them back up over where they need to be. So don't get alarmed if somebody dips a little below just because of the timing of development, because in a small community, you may only have one apartment building every 10 years. And that makes a big difference in the density.
Great. Thank you. Great conversation. You want to wrap it up, Ms. Torres?
Let's do that. So what to expect next? I'll go ahead and I'll respond to the feedback that you have provided today. Thank you very much. It's been a very robust conversation, which I am very happy to see. I was not expecting. And we'll revisit this at a future CDC meeting. As I mentioned, this does have to be a business item, so we will ask for action by this committee and then take that forward, whatever that may be, to the full council.
Great. Thanks, Ms. Torres. I'm glad we were able to have this robust conversation
And
before we
then-
see it as a business item.
Yes, thank you. Just one last thing. What we do plan, in the same way that we did after Thrive was adopted, is to, after the 2050 plan is adopted, to revise this more holistically if we need to reflect whatever the council's current adopted plans are. So we would see this in the future as well.
Great. Thank you. Discussion on that report. Councilmember Bento.
Well, I was just going to note that some would say we fleshed this all out. I would just suggest that we flushed it out.
I was kind of sorry I called on you.
Really bad.
Right.
I think that was a
Thank you.
collective groan.
And I wonder why.
Thank you very much to the committee for sure for this really good conversation, Ms. Torres for the presentation, and they're very technical and complicated. And we're really putting you through your paces today, Ms. Torres, because you're handling the next item as well. And so it's planning for regional growth here on the threshold of our 2050 comprehensive planning. So Ms. Torres.
Yes, thank you, Chair and committee members, for continuing to listen. So we'll go ahead and talk just a little bit about today's agenda. We'll start our conversation talking about some ground setting, how we are approaching the 2050 plan, some of the work that has already been done by the council, accomplishments already well in hand. We'll talk a little bit then about planning for growth and development and what that really includes and what to expect next. So just to kind of set us all at the same pace. I know everyone perhaps is familiar with this, but I wanted to repeat it. The council's role in regional planning was established a long time ago as part of the Metropolitan Land Planning Act, which was enacted by the legislature in 1976. So the statute outlines both legislative findings and purpose that establishes how the council will guide growth and development across the region. The legislature found that the region is made up of interdependent communities of which each impact the region's infrastructure. Growth innately creates a need for public services, and with growth, there's an increased risk of pollution and water supply shortages. The legislature created a regional planning model to ensure coordinated, orderly, and economical development, and to protect the public health, safety, and well-being of the region's residents. So this is the framework within which we are operating, based in statute, grounded in language from the legislature. So according to state statute, the Metropolitan Council shall prepare and adopt a comprehensive development guide for the metropolitan area. If we're asking, why do we do this? Why was this the directive? The council's responsible for planning for the growth and development as well as of the region, as well as ensuring the efficient use of the infrastructure as it relates to our transportation system, our wastewater system, and as we plan for regional parks. We will talk a little bit more about statute and how it gets much more specific when we're talking about comprehensive plans in a future slide. So if we look at some of the work that's already been completed or initiated, a lot has already been done to inform the 2050 Regional Development Guide. We are not, and we rarely ever start at ground zero. So I'm not going to read all of these things. This is for illustrative purposes, so don't worry about that. I just wanted to demonstrate how much information the council has already received to help prepare for the 2050 planning process. These are all presentations, these lists from starting at 2000, I can't go back for some reason, but starting in 2000, going to 2021, this is 2022, and then showing already how we're starting to have conversations in 2023. This also doesn't include the work that's been done on some of the plans that you have adopted, so I'll address those as well. This is just an illustration of all of the work that has been done to kind of set the foundation to provide information so that the council has a broad understanding of the trends in the region, how the market forces are impacting development, so that we can all be informed along the way across a variety of topics and issues for future planning purposes. So this also doesn't include everything, because this was just the Metropolitan Council agendas, the Committee of the Whole agendas, information items. I might have slipped a few things in from the CDC and the Environment Committee, but I guarantee like very few things from transportation are on here, because that would have been like a whole nother 3 slides all by themselves, because they do a tremendous amount of work between Metropolitan Transportation Services and Metro Transit. I wanted to just share this to highlight again that we're never starting at ground zero. We know a lot of things. Our annual reporting too adds to this. So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about plat monitoring. That is something that we talk about every year. We have an Ag Preserves report as well. That's an annual report. We have building and permit surveys. All of these studies, discussions, panel presentations where we bring experts forward to you or local governments forward to you to listen and engage with it directly. It's all to build an understanding of the region, what the region's trends, challenges, and opportunities are, and what shapes the character of this region. There's a lot of really great things about this region. There's a reason why we're such an attractive area for nationally, globally, but we do have our challenges, and they are significant, and we also have cross-cutting issues that you've been talking about through the development of the regional vision and values. So climate change affects everyone, every entity, and no one organization or department or division at the council is responsible for things like that. So there's a lot of challenges that we have to address in our planning process. But as you saw too, some of the items were just responding to the pandemic, so we shift as well as the council provides specific direction. Some of the studies that were done throughout the pandemic, and a lot of that, if you notice the timeline, 2020, I think, I'm a little foggy on a couple of years there, but we all kind of still worked through all of those difficult times, and a tremendous amount of research and tremendous amount of analysis was brought forward to the council for your information. So all of this was done in a way where we're trying to build an understanding of the region and kind of set the stage for upcoming planning work. I just wanted to mention too, we've got some long-term projects like the 2040 Comprehensive Plan Composite, which focused on planning that was done by local governments. We don't just kind of review and authorize those plans. We dig into them and see what local governments are planning for that may or may not be a requirement of the Metropolitan Council, what issues are local governments prioritizing, what kind of policies are they enacting? Where are they directing their investments? The priorities that local governments share with us in those comprehensive plans are brought before you in a lot of different ways as well. So planning for healthy communities, planning for aging communities, integrating equity in local comprehensive plans are not hard and fast requirements, but we saw them time and time again as local governments were identifying their own challenges, their own opportunities, and planning for those accordingly in their comprehensive plan. So what we've done simplified is a lot of data, a lot of analysis, a lot of studies. We've got discussion panels. We're talking about in advisory committees about decisions on where the council is allocating its resources. We're talking about community experiences when we bring local government staff to a committee of the whole meeting and they present to you about equity and how they're integrating equity in both rural centers as well as suburban areas like Belle Plaine and Bloomington respectively. We can see how they're tackling different issues as well. We do a lot of work with external partners and experts when we bring forward panels from like a developers panel, which we've done a couple of different times. Those are when we're also trying to engage with really important stakeholders across the region and bring those conversations in front of you very specifically. And council member work groups too also provide context as it relates to values, issues, trends. The council set up a housing work group. The council set up a climate work group. The Water Resources Policy Plan Advisory Group and the Transportation Policy Plan Advisory Work Group and the Transportation Policy Plan Technical Working Group. So you've got all of these different things that are focused on very specific areas, and a lot of that work has been happening over the last several years. Council adopted plans as well, so the council has undertaken some really big projects. When the former council, I should say, first came on board, one of the first things that the governor asked council members to do is to put together a strategic plan, and this council, the former council did that as well. That identifies priorities, identifies actions, and how we're going to work to address those focus areas, which in the last strategic plan is transportation, reducing racial disparities, housing, and sustainability. The council at the height of the at the start, I should say, of the pandemic, tackled a regional economic framework, so development of a regional plan to meet federal requirements for a comprehensive economic development strategy, allowed local governments then to apply for funding that was quickly becoming available at the start of the pandemic. And this council worked with the Center for Economic Inclusion and Greater MSP to work very quickly. A plan usually does not come to fruition very easily, and worked very quickly to bring those partners to the table and adopt a regional economic framework. Just this last year, both the Zero Emissions Bus Transition Plan and the Metropolitan Council's Climate Action Work Plan were adopted as well. Those are very long-term projects that the council directs staff to work on. Some are directed by statute. Others, the council is providing feedback on all along the way. Moving forward into the 2050 regional plan accomplishments, the former council, and many of you were a part of that, worked for over a year to have conversations about regional values, the regional vision, and significant cross-cutting issues. That's the starting point. In early February, the former council endorsed, but not adopted, endorsed a working set of values, a working set of vision statements, and identified those 4 significant cross-cutting issues to help guide the work that the various policy and system plan areas are doing as they're working on their 2050 policy stuff. So, that being said, that's not the only thing. I'm going to talk about community designations one more time, because it was a year-long process as well. Councilmember Wolf led the charge in the Land Use Advisory Committee, and this was a very data-driven analysis of similarities and not of local governments. So policy statements have not been developed or applied to these community designations right now, and they are just developed as a kind of preliminary working set of community designations as we move forward in the 2050 planning process. Part of the conversations this year will work on density analysis and some of the other land use policies that are associated with community designations, but having a preliminary set of designations really helps staff group the communities in conversation, in engagement, and as we're looking forward into policy development itself. So this is really helpful for a lot of different reasons, which Raya, again, shared with us last week at the Committee of the Whole meeting. So today's info item, as I said before, really sets the stage for the next couple of CDC meetings. In the upcoming agendas, you'll see topics like regional growth forecasts, which is a very popular and interesting topic. Whenever the regional forecast comes out, it is a kickoff to a lot of local conversations that we help to facilitate within community development. You'll also hear about efforts for scenario planning and a more in-depth analysis of opportunities and challenges as we're looking at land use and the cross-cutting regional issues, which are, again, equity, climate, natural systems, and public health, safety, and well-being. Preliminarily, so, as I mentioned before, the council is directed in statute to prepare and adopt a comprehensive development guide. Statute does provide more specificity on what the development guide should consist of, though. So as you dig further into statute, this is the Metropolitan Land Planning Act again. Here you can see the scope of the planning responsibilities as defined in statute for the council. Prescribing guides for the orderly and economical development, public and private, of the metropolitan area. And it goes on to list specific areas, land use, parks and open space land needs, airports, highways, transit facilities, public hospitals, libraries, schools, and other public buildings. So it's really expansive. The council addresses a lot of this in our system and policy plans, the Regional Development Guide, which is that overarching piece of policy and guidance as well. One thing that I want to highlight here is that the statute does also talk about the physical, social, or economic needs of the metropolitan area. So as we're looking at climate change and as we're looking at equity issues, statute does permit the Metropolitan Council to dig deeper into these issues. How the council does that will be policy decisions and part of what we will bring forward as the menu of options of what it may take to reach the regional vision that the council sets forth. So as we're planning for growth and development, we do have to analyze issues that impact where development can happen, how that happens, what intensity of development certain lands are capable of handling, when that may happen. So in Thrive, these were called special features, but they are in fact drivers of change. These are factors which impact the way growth happens. Perhaps it's a limitation on where we can guide growth and development to protect natural resources, or because of water supply constraints that we know of in the Northeast area. The drivers of change range from infrastructure to forecast to equity considerations. Some of these factors are cross-divisional issues, and we're working now to evaluate how to incorporate these into the land use analysis. As part of conversations with the Land Use Advisory Committee last year, a lot of these issues, not issues, but opportunities and challenges, drivers and factors, however you would like to term it, came up a lot. They were part of the analysis. As we mentioned, it was a data-driven analysis, so some of the committee members may have been asking, well, so where are water supply constraints? Where are natural resource constraints? Where can we guide growth and development, and where shouldn't we? And those are policy conversations, so they were kind of put on pause, and we will tackle those now this year as we dig deeper into that, because as I mentioned, community designations didn't dig into that. But the information and conversations that we had around the development of community designations and the development of the values and vision statements, the cross-cutting issues, all of that feeds into this kind of broader conversation about how we will talk about the orderly and economical development of the region, and that's what the council's responsibility lies in. I keep talking about opportunities and challenges. As we're looking at land use policy and cross-cutting regional issues, we are starting to see output from that analysis, and it will be coming in front of you in April to have a deeper discussion. This is like super high level from that initial analysis. So as we're looking at natural systems, some of the themes that were coming out were preservation and or degradation, water quality and availability, environmental quality, et cetera. So as we're digging into each of the cross-cutting issues and how land use may have an impact or be impacted by those issues, how is it that policy from the Metropolitan Council impact those regional cross-cutting issues? That gets to what I'm kind of talking about broadly as like our approach to achieve the council's regional vision, or the regional vision for all the residents of the region. What we are planning to do, and what I would like to share with you, is rather than taking the typical tact of, so this is what's in Thrive, we're going to start there, which we very, very well may end up in a similar place, but let's filter it through the regional vision. So if we're talking about climate change, we're talking about equity, we're talking about the importance of natural systems, and we're talking about public health because we're kind of emerging from or still within a pandemic, how are we addressing that in policy? What I would like to say is that what will it take to achieve the regional vision? What actions, what policies are necessary from the council in order to actually make different outcomes as it relates to climate change, as it relates to regional racial disparities? What kind of policies could help the council achieve a 2050 regional vision? Those may be very broad and big ideas. Those may be, we'll try and not bring anything like shoot to the moon kind of ideas. We do want to ground ourselves a little bit in reality, but some of them may require difficult decision-making. And it's at that point then where policymakers like yourselves are the ones that will provide that direction to staff as far as being able to take on a change in how the council's investments are directed, whether we are willing to take on challenging and difficult conversations with our regional stakeholders, regional partners. Those are things that we will bring forward to you to what can achieve that through the lens of what will it take to achieve the regional vision. Like I said, we're not going to propose rockets to the moon or anything like that, so we will ground ourselves, but we will also provide innovative and ambitious ideas on how the vision could be reached. Part of what we do is engage with our regional stakeholders. This is a lot, it's a kind of tiny letters, so I apologize for that. And this is just the land use and local planning assistance initiatives. So there are broader council-wide efforts in each of the various technical planning areas as well. We have a lot of ongoing relationships with local governments. We have a sector representative program. So as council members are aware, you're kind of partnered with a staff person that's available to help you answer technical questions that your constituents may very well be asking about, to help prepare for meetings. We're always there to provide that kind of side-by-side technical assistance. That's just one of the ongoing relationships that we would tap into. We do have broad engagement that the kind of communications department is leading, and we will participate in and identify where we need to fill in our efforts. We also have a lot of new efforts with existing partners. With Metro Cities, for example, last year we initiated a regional planning advisory group that is meant to be a long-term group. It's local staff, so community development directors, a few city administrators or city managers, city planners, people that actually do the plans in the room to have these broad policy conversations. That group also focuses on process improvements as it relates to our review of comprehensive plans and amendments. So it's not just a singular policy-focused group. It does talk about process as well. And those are our existing partners, but we're trying something new. It's going well so far. We have another meeting coming up in a couple of weeks where we will be talking about forecasting and housing. So we'll be talking broadly about the same issues that the Land Use Advisory Committee talks about. The Regional Planning Advisory Group will also provide feedback. Again, that's just one of the initiatives. We also have new initiatives. Earlier as we started talking about the Regional Development Guide for 2050, we brought forward an idea to build a youth cohort. So we have done that. It's called a Youth Leaders Collab, not collaboration, just to emphasize that and my discomfort with not finishing a word. However, that's the youth, and that is how, they wanted to name themselves. We have been working with 6 groups, 6 organizations that are youth organizations. All of those organizations have leadership programs built within their structure, and we are building capacity, building understanding, and then the participants from that youth organization are kind of, as they learn more about the Metropolitan Council, what we do, and the areas of responsibility that we have, they will then do outreach within their own community, talking about this from their perspective, talking about it from their lens, the things that are important to them, and we're there to provide support. You'll see in an upcoming committee of the whole meeting where the 6 organizations will be providing an expo of sorts, so we encourage you to come a half an hour earlier. Think about the intern showcase that we do every year. All of those organizations will be available. They will each provide a presentation on the work that they have done and their recommendations for policy. And you will have an opportunity to engage with them directly at that committee of the whole meeting. So that's, again, just one of our new initiatives. It's very, engagement is, first of all, ongoing, so there's always conversations happening. It's also a very large organization, and there's a lot of committees, there's a lot of individual efforts and initiatives. So again, this is just the things that I'm a part of and my team is a part of as part of community development. But transportation and water resources and parks, they all have stakeholders that they partner with specifically as well. And so this is just a snapshot of a small piece of the work that we're doing to engage with our stakeholders across the region. Next steps. As I said, we were kind of setting a foundation today, setting this up for future conversations. You'll continue to work. Mike Larson is in local planning assistance as well, and you've been meeting with him for a very long time now. You'll continue to work to refine the values, vision statements, and regional goals. We'll have conversations about regional forecasts and scenario planning at the next CDC meeting. We'll start talking about land use policy, and we will be doing that not only with this committee, but with the Land Use Advisory Committee as well. And we are going to kick off all of those new engagement initiatives, if they haven't started already, in the coming days. So With that being said, there's a lot of work. It's a huge plan, a lot of effort. It's a once in 10 years opportunity for the council to really set its vision and to set the council up for achieving that vision. So it's a big task. It's a lot of work. This is why we're planners, though. We love this nerdy kind of stuff. So if I talk too much about it, I apologize in advance, but this is the fun part. So that being said, I'll just ask for, if you have any questions, I'm here and available.
Thank you, Ms. Torres, to you and to your team. And we love that you love this, and we do too, or we won't be sitting here. But we don't go nearly as deep as you and your team. So thanks for this. And I know committee members, I want to ask just a quick question, because you kind of came back to this in your wrap up there. And when you were talking about the approach to achieve a regional vision, and I think I heard you say a couple times that it's a different approach, or there's something different this round. And I'm wondering if you can just expand on that a little. What's different?
Chair and committee members, I can expand just a little bit about that. First of all, some of it's conceptual, I don't know. But also, and that's part of what planners are very comfortable, living in that kind of ambiguous, like we're gonna figure it out together kind of space. Not everybody is. But a lot of times with policy development, you start from where your existing plan is. So that's Thrive. And Thrive did a lot of really great things. We've talked about some of that with this committee and others. But there's no need to be held within the bounds of Thrive when we can think broader, we can think bigger, we can think differently. So it's really a thought exercise that we're trying to see where policy may eventually land as part of those conversations.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yep, very helpful. Thank you. And then I think Councilmember Johnson was requested for Councilmember Lindstrom and Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you. I have 2 points in one. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was a great question, because I was kind of on that line of thought too. I would say too, we have a bold vision, and especially when you look at the framework that we developed with Greater MSP, Economic Inclusion, Center for Economic Inclusion, all of that, very important. I know that we've got Greater MSP noted on here. I'm always wondering, how do we reach out to the private sector, the job providers, the job creators, because that's the underpinning of our economy. Now, with that said, the guide plan works on that, right? We decide where we're going to put commercial, industrial. There's a lot of programs out there to help entrepreneurs. But I'm just trying to figure out where especially where it comes to, I like your, opportunities, challenges, whatever the things might be, but and I appreciate Itasca. I think over the last 20 years, Itasca's changed a lot. They now sit within Greater MSP, which is fine. But you used to have the CEOs of the titans of industry here around a table. And that's shifted because they're not here anymore, which is why Itasca was created, so that there would still be a body of somebody who was leading this from the private sector. So as I say, I think we can do what we can do in government. We can work with our local partners. The legislature certainly puts limits on what we can and what we cannot do, but with that said, we are a platform. I think we are the springboard of what is possible. And I just think that I would love to figure out how we can work more intentionally with the major employers here. It impacts housing. I worked at Prosperity's Front Door, which is a partnership that was formed for 18 months to do some work and produce a scorecard as it related to the Dayton's Housing Task Force and the recommendations, which some of that was the homework starts at home, pulling that, showing and exemplifying that. But it always came down to, working with employers, which is, I think, one of the reasons I got the job, because I have a Chamber of Commerce background and at Greater MSP and so on and so forth. But then the pandemic hit, so we couldn't meet with anybody, so it was virtual. But I guess all I'm trying to say is how do we intersect, either through Itasca, which they came out with their housing information, which is really good. Wells Fargo is out there, others are out there. But, where are the rest of the Fortune 500s we've got? How do we get them engaged in, meaningful support that we don't direct? Of course, the government doesn't direct. In certain ways they do, but we need them to be partners with us, because if people cannot afford to live in this region because they cannot find, and schools too, I was gonna mention schools, universities, all of that, right? And if you're a local government person, you know that when you are doing your comp plan, you are working with any school that's in your district with your forecasts and all that. So I guess I'm just trying to make sure that when we have partners listed, I'm just gonna keep saying, when do we ever get to really, lure in, entice the private sector to tell us more about what is causing a drag on the economy, what is causing inflation, like to take a look at corporate profits. I mean, just, what does that mean as it relates to what we're trying to do here? Because we want our businesses to be successful and they have to be part of this. So I cannot speak enough about how I think they have to be integral to this, or we're just talking to maybe the choir out there, and everybody nods their heads and, we get it, but we need more people that maybe haven't been asked to really give us their insights. And then this is a little bit off, and this can be for another day, I guess, but as we're working on this 2050 plan, it sets up local governments again to get into the 10-year rhythm where they start pretty soon working on the next thing. And I still have a city or some that have just finished up work. And I know we talk about our smaller communities that really struggle with this. And I'm just wondering, as we kind of work to build this so that, when we put it out there to everybody, I'm just gonna, raise my hand. If we can somehow help those little cities or give them a bit of a pass where they don't have to hire really expensive consultants to only say, for example, like the city of Maple Plain, love that city, love that mayor, but they're fully built and they've got different sets of problems. So to add on some of these things for them is burdensome. So I'd like to just make a note of that, because we hear from them all the time, and at least I do. I have those, you might too, I don't know.
A second.
Okay, so just a thought, that one sticks out for, as something that's been on my mind for 4 years while I've been on the council.
Well, did you want a response from Ms. Torres, or should she keep moving through?
No, God bless her.
Looking at the, all right.
Yeah, it's venting, but it's really like, it's like any of us that have been around doing
Right.
something for a while. You get your sea legs and you're like, all right, let's go, right? That's where I'm at, so.
Oh, and I should let the committee know, before we started, I was chatting with Ms. Smith, and she said, well, it's kind of a short agenda. It could be a short meeting. And I said, no!
It's not 6
Don't
yet.
say that. So, yeah.
Oh, and then the only other thing I want to say, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yeah.
If you don't know Metro Cities, which you probably all do, but that is a really good group to read the newsletters that they send us. They're watching what we're doing. We're watching what they're doing. We partner with them. But that group essentially was formed in many ways to keep an eye on us, partner with us, however you want to say it, because we directly impact those cities. So it's really a good work group, and they have great leadership there.
Great point, thanks. Further discussion, Councilmember Lindstrom, then Councilmember Chambliss. Councilmember
Thanks.
Lindstrom.
You talked about the engagement and engagement with the 6 youth. The collab, as they call themselves. I love that. And there's 4 or 5 other engagement buckets outlined: the Environmental Justice Framework Advisory Group, Climate, and others. Are those also underway, or can we invite other people to participate in those engagement opportunities in the months and year coming up, or are they kind of, it sounded like the youth leaders collab was kind of set. You got the 6 and they're off doing their things. Is that true that that is set? And then what are the opportunities for, in these other buckets, for folks to engage?
Ms. Torres.
Chair and committee members, those are just starting. We're just kind of shaping what that might look like right now. So we're contacting partners and starting to get organized for those advisory groups or technical groups. That's probably not a comprehensive list of all of the things that we'll be doing. But if you have ideas on organizations that you particularly want us to reach out to, my contact information is at the end of the presentation, and I'm happy to field all of those. We're just getting started with the external land use specific policy conversations or the groups that we're talking with. So none of that is set in stone with the exception of the youth collaboration. What you'll see on here too is a land use policy cohorts idea. And what that is, we'll be taking the structure and form of the youth collab they also call it YLC if you want to get even shorter than that. So taking the kind of structure and curriculum that was done to focus on youth organizations and taking that to organizations that represent people that we very rarely hear from as part of a planning process, and contracting micro consultancies and contracting with them, fairly compensating them to participate in the regional planning process as well. The ideas that we're kind of thinking about there, those are organizations representing people that are experiencing homelessness, a lot of the urban Indian organizations as well we would be able to partner with. Any kind of topical idea whether that is an aging population. We could work with an organization that represents folks like that. We could work with organizations that represent disabled people, people that are differently abled. So we can partner with a variety of different kind of topics and organizations that represent different kind of constituencies that we rarely hear about. And I'm trying to emphasize and make sure that we are trying to bring in new voices and not listen to only the partners that are well established with us that know how to navigate a government process. We've also had, a lot of public health kind of conversations over the last several years. We could very well kind of work with an organization representing a public health organization that works with people of color, for example. So we have relationships with a lot of different organizations. We'll also do an RFP to solicit, and we'll make phone calls. And so we're really going to try and bring in new voices and new opportunities. None of that is set in stone just yet, and so we're still absolutely, if you want to give us ideas, we're open to that. If you have other initiatives you want us to kick off, we're open to that as well.
Well, yeah, Councilmember Lindstrom.
In a couple of weeks, Lisa Barajas and I are presenting to the, and I might not get the name right, St. Paul Climate Environmental Justice Action Committee, something along those lines. And so perhaps you could, when she gets back from her travels, the two of you could connect on this to say hey, Action Committee, stay tuned because we're going to be tapping into you in the near future.
That sounds great. Thank you.
And I have been queued Councilmember Chambliss, then Councilmember Carter. Councilmember Chambliss.
Well, thank you. As you can see, we're all very, very enthusiastic about this discussion and the community development and the planning, that work that goes into developing a regional guide. And I appreciate having this framework as we start to develop the 2050 plan. I spoke at the last council meeting about looking back, and I did do that. I looked at the 2030 plan. Obviously, there are a lot of similarities to the 2040 plan, and we've had a lot of accomplishments. We can't highlight all of them because it would be kind of nice to just do a laundry list, though, and have it somewhere, though, as an appendix. But I really want to look at, what were they, I wanted to look at the 2030 plan so I could see what were they thinking, what were the things that were important to them then. And I saw that, they really wanted to partner with our local municipalities, organizations and agencies, the private sector, and we're doing that. And when we started that partnership with Greater MSP, so obviously, so there's that connection to 2030, and although we're not talking about our regional plan as a whole, the Transitway Advancement Policy can be used as a framework for other types of policies as it relates to our partners in parks and recreation or the environment. And also, I saw some things where they talked about, and it was mentioned today, the 2008, I think somebody mentioned it, the financial crisis that we had, and how we had to kind of slow down some of our plans. A lot of the comprehensive plans did not move forward after that, and they became stagnant. What can we do to revitalize that? These are still goals that many cities still have to, for example, they mentioned a town square in the Brooklyn Park area, which didn't happen after the 2008 crisis. And there's hopes that it will happen with some transit-oriented development, like the light rail, for example, the Blue Line extension. But how do we make those connections? How do we see, like, I'd almost like to see kind of like a timeline, a travel timeline that even if it's before 2030, where do we start? And just kind of be able to, I'm a visual person, a lot of people are visual. How do we actually see that, especially as we're bringing on new council members and as some of us are trying to get to that next level of learning and contributing in our second or longer terms. What else did I want to say? We talked about what's different in this plan approach and, kind of thinking outside the box, which makes a lot of sense because I think that can help you add value to your core vision. But, and I know we're not starting out from scratch with our vision, but trying to look at where we are today and what we're forecasting for the future as we look at our vision. And I don't know what that process is going to look like, whether or not we just say, okay, let's just do envisioning, forget about what we did before, because sometimes that's the best way to do it, is to just forget about what we did before. And if we could start today and into the future, like, for example, what would it look like? And then maybe take us back to, okay, this is what we did before with our vision, and this is how that vision has been strengthened over time. Those are just kind of my thoughts that have been kind of rolling around in my head. So I thought I would share that.
Thanks for sharing. Did you need, okay, great. We'll move down the list then. Councilmember Carter.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate and am very excited about the manner in which you have undertaken to create this broad spectrum of engagement leading toward this next plan. Clearly, in the process of that work, there are contributions that will assist us as we do this work day to day. I just wanted to make a comment. I do have questions, but I'll get to you offline because you may not have the groups and how we're working with them and what their commitments to us are, things of that sort. But it does occur to me that as we work to reach out and engage the diverse components of our community, we want to make sure that we don't ignore that there are young leaders, for example, who may want to participate in other areas outside of the Young Leaders Collab, perhaps in the Rural Focus Group or the Climate and Natural Resource Group. I hope that we're making certain, I know the reason we're engaging is because we have that lack, and we're trying to build up that kind of participation across all comprehensive areas. And I would just want to make certain that we're not just targeting them for specialized groups, but that we also are working to ensure that those who have a desire and capacity today are able to join other areas outside of those specific interest areas. So just the comment there, and again, I'm making it just because I need to make sure to make it, not because I think that you've ignored that. But, on the record there, thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember. And I'll just add, really lift up what my colleague said here, and what Councilmember Carter just finished with as well. And a couple of things that really stand out to me, Ms. Torres, and one is I'm really excited about the idea of the land use policy cohort. It'll be interesting to see how that grows and develops, because in my experience, when the public sector invests in communities like this, it has a ever-expanding ripple effect throughout the community, and it really builds capacity. And when we start using words, and I love that we use words like well-being and things like that connected to our policy work and our planning work, I feel like that's really looking after the well-being of a community. So I look forward to supporting that and happy to confer on potential recruitment, ways of recruiting for that cohort, but that's a piece that I'm going to be particularly interested in. Well, anything, yeah, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have to say, another thing, and I think I've mentioned this at a couple of meetings, but I've heard internal at the council that engagement, having enough staff to do engagement in Thrive 2050 is really stretched and tough.
Sure.
And so I just think it's really important that let us know what you need, because, you know, I think Councilmember Lindstrom, you brought it up regarding safety in the HAT team and what the Metro HRA is doing. And, you know, please ask for resources, even if it's not budgeted for. We know that we've gone through immense change here at the council through the pandemic, just through workforce changes, the whole culture of workforce out there and people coming and going. And I just think that if you need something, ask us. And I'm saying this across the council. I've coined a term. I don't want to hear about things at the 11th hour anymore. Just can't go that route. Just let us know, because if you don't have the resources you need to do where I think we can go with all of these ideas here tonight and more, then we don't accomplish what we're doing. So if you don't have enough people, or you don't have whatever it is, work through and ask, because I'm going to be listening for those things, especially in management as we chair that. I talk sometimes with George, Deputy Administrator Gonzalez, George, just because he hears things too. And so we're a big organization. We know the budgets get adopted in the, you know, fall, winter, things change. But people power is really where our strengths lie, and I want to make sure you have the resources you need.
Thank you so much.
Ditto.
Committee members, anything else? Ms. Torres, anything?
Just one last thing.
Yeah.
And I'll be brief because I'm sure we're almost at time. Since you offered, Councilmember Johnson, we will be asking you all to help with that engagement as well. It's the regional vision, it's the regional plan, and you know your districts and your communities very well. Your participation and help in talking about it will be on your docket as well.
Great.
Thank you, thanks for that. And Michelle, anything for us here before we adjourn?
Yes, I do have something I'd like to say. I am going to be out on FMLA for the next 2 months, getting a new knee. I'm very excited.
Good luck to you, yeah.
There'll be a rotation of recording secretaries, but communications will come from Sandy Dingle.
Okay, good to know, thanks, and all the best with your recovery and your surgery, yeah. Ms. Smith, anything for the group? No. And seeing no further business before this committee, we're adjourned.
Thank you so much.
Good yeah, it was really good conversation.
I'm going to landfall, my little tiny landfall.
Even something that's sort of
I have, yeah.
very minor change.
I have not been regular with that. This is some good